Hi. I'm Nancy Marr, and I'm the Voter Service Director for the League of Women Voters of Palos Verdes, and I've been working with the city and with some of the other residents to set up this forum tonight. The League is pleased to be working with the PVE Chamber of Commerce tonight in presenting this event. We want to thank the candidates for coming and welcome them, and thank all of you for coming and welcome to you to the forum tonight. Both the League and the Chamber are nonpartisan organizations, meaning we don't endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. The candidates drew lots for speaking order, and they're sitting in that order. Just a reminder, this isn't a debate tonight, and it's not a town hall either. It's just a forum where the candidates' ideas are shared with you, the audience. I also want to note that our two people who are reviewing questions tonight are Karen Baresh, raise your hand, Karen, who is the president of the Palos Verdes League of Women Voters, and Eileen Hupp, who's the executive director of the Palos Verdes Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. We do have 3 cameras filming tonight. They are here independently. They are not associated with either the League of Women Voters or the Chamber. There are 2 homeowners groups and an independent filmer. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Linda Herman. Linda is on the board of the League of Women Voters of Palos Verdes. She is a past local president and a past state president and has a lot of experience as a moderator, and she will be conducting the forum tonight. Thank you.
Well, I've got a bit of a repetition here, and I'd also like to welcome you to today's candidates forum. As you know, we have 2 we're sponsored by the League and by the Chamber. Our forums are conducted for informational purposes without a hidden agenda and are controlled by principles of nonpartisanship, as was already stated, and your vote is an essential step in the process of democracy. Just to note, we are aware that a candidate forum was held a week ago under the sponsorship of the Palos Verdes Residents for Responsible Government, and are pleased to provide a second opportunity for candidates to address pertinent issues their constituents may be concerned about. We are therefore pleased to present the following 6 candidates who are seeking a position on the Palos Verdes State City Council. In order, David McGowan, Kevin McCarthy, Betty Lynn Peterson, Victoria Lozzi. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Well, okay. Thank you. Michael Kemps and Jennifer King. Jeff Groves has withdrawn from the election and is no longer a candidate. Before going on, I should mention I was given some warnings about making sure everybody is heard. So if the videographer is all right with everything, we'll move on. He also asked that the candidates look directly at the person who's doing the video so that you will be heard. Just want to make sure I follow his instructions. Each candidate has agreed to abide by the guidelines stipulated in the letter of invitation. The format is as follows. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement and then 1 minute to respond to questions from the audience. Our timers will hold up a card indicating when their time is up. While we will try not to stop you in mid-sentence, please be responsive to the time limitations. I would ask the audience that you remain as quiet as possible while the candidates are speaking so that everyone may hear, and please hold your applause until the forum has ended so that the candidates will have all the time possible for getting their points across. And as usual, we ask that you turn off your cell phones. Should there be time available after all questions have been submitted, we will open up the forum. I'm sorry, we're doing that differently. We're going to take questions that have been submitted as well as questions from the audience, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth from one resource to another. We will conclude our questions and answer period at 8:50, and each candidate will then present a 1-minute closing statement. It appears the video recording of our forum will be available for public viewing. I just wanted to mention we have received a number of questions online in addition to a number of questions that have been presented here today. So we will not get to all of them. So please be understanding of that. Please hold up the cards as you finish your questions, and somebody will be around to pick them up. I think that's already happened too. You may address your question to a particular candidate or to all, but other candidates will be given the opportunity to respond as well. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Those that fall in the same general area may be consolidated to allow us to cover as many topics as possible in the time allotted. All questions become the property of the League of Women Voters and the Chamber of Commerce. And the order of opening statements was determined by lot, as was mentioned before we began. So we begin with Mr. McGowan.
Thank you. My wife Lynn and I have been residents in Palos Verde Estates for 23 years, and I am one of the 5 residents that was selected to be a member of the Financial Advisory Committee. I bring a 50-year professional accounting and financial background to our city. I have an undergraduate degree in accounting from the University of Denver. I have an MBA from Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. I'm a certified public accountant. I hold a certificate in management accounting, and I'm also a certified fraud examiner. I've held senior executive positions in finance and general management in both manufacturing and financial services, namely Medtronic, Inc., the biomedical manufacturer, and in the Financial Services, Inc., Norwest Corporation, currently known as Wells Fargo, and U.S. Bank System, currently known as U.S. Bank. For the last 30 years, I have been running dispute analysis and resolution practices with the public accounting sector. I'm a retired senior partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I currently have my own company, Lanata Bay Associates. I'm familiar with how cities do their municipal accounting and provide assistance to the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, Orange County bankruptcies, and a number of other different areas. My threshold or issues are safety, security, and fiscal integrity. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McCarthy.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I've been a resident, my wife and I have been residents here since 1997. We live up in the Espinosa Circle. We raised 2 girls here. We have horses at the stable. 11 days ago, I retired from the Los Angeles Police Department, where I worked for 39 years. My last assignment, for the last 10 years, I've been in charge of detectives and over really neat stuff, the kind of stuff that they make movies about, murders and serial rapists and extortions and kidnap. I've been retired for 11 days, and my wife told me I need to find a job. So here I am. I had a couple other functions in the police department. I represented the chief of police at multiple task force committees, LA Impact, which is an LA County Chiefs Initiative, LA HIDA, which is high-intensity traffic area with federal agents. And additionally, I'm the president of the Los Angeles Police Relief Association. We're elected members, nonprofit, and we administer the health benefits to 16,000 active and retired people. Thank you for that. So my 3 points are public safety. You know, my 39 years in public safety, that's pretty much all I did. It's all operations. I think I can bring value to the council with all my operational experience. Accountability. I was also part of a CompStat process where we held command officers accountable for everything. We counted everything. We counted beans, we counted arrests, and I think accountability on the council is really important. And finally, transparency. Transparency in verbal communications as well as written communications. So,
Thank you.
Oh.
Is it? No? Oh, okay, sorry.
Just to start the clock over?
I couldn't see it from here.
Okay. The bottom line is I think I can bring a lot of value to the council, and the only thing I'm not taking contributions. The only thing I'm asking for is your vote. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Peterson.
Hi, I'm Betty Lynn Peterson. I've been a resident of Palos Verdes Estate since 1990, graduated from the Peninsula School District. This is my 4th year on the City Council, and I'm the current mayor, so thank you for being here. 4 years ago, when I was encouraged by multiple Palos Verdes Estates residents to run for the council, I was flattered and somewhat amused. I'm a businesswoman. My forte is in real estate. I do sales, development, construction, and property management. Public service was not in my trajectory, but after giving it some serious thoughts, I thought this aligns with my purpose, that I wanted to contribute back to the society, and also, this is my big why. I wanted to make a difference. So I threw my hat in the ring with no other contenders. The election was actually canceled. So as the mayor, my goal was, and still is, to rebuild this community. I'm the unifier. We've been through some rough waters these last 4 years. The city council inherited the Parklands lawsuit. The city council, blindsided by the naysayers and skeptics, we lost Measure D. The city council, after losing Measure D, urgently and carefully put Measure E back on the ballot, because without Measure E, we would have been bankrupt. Let me say that again, we would have been bankrupt. As part of my initiative to rebuild the community is to promote dialogue. I started doing monthly walk and talk with the mayor, and also to promote our local businesses. I started monthly PVE Eats with the mayor. But one of my most proudest accomplishment was actually to settle the Parklands lawsuit. Because being in 14-hour mediation and encouraging parties to come to a resolution when there's so many strong personalities at the table was an art form. And being mentally tougher and wanting to make sure that what we do is the right thing for our residents is dedication and seeing the big picture. This is why I deserve your vote on March 5th. Sorry, or a day earlier.
Thank you very much. Ms. Losey?
Hi, I'm Victoria Losey, and in case you didn't know, I'm your current city treasurer. Serving as city treasurer, combined with my 30-year career in corporate banking, I believe that makes me experienced enough to be an effective city council member. Why am I running? I am running because I strongly believe we need new leadership. When I ran for city treasurer 2 years ago, for me, the issues were lack of transparency, poor communication to residents, and lack of long-term vision and planning. From a person who attends every city council meeting, I don't think the issues have changed. As treasurer, I've been immersed in the city finances for the past 2 years. I've learned a lot in that time, and the first thing I learned is that we need to do things differently. We need to think and operate a little more like a business with limited resources. We need to make sure we're running our operations as efficiently as possible. We need to work on a balanced budget and a long-term plan. I was shocked when I became treasurer to find that there was no long-term plan other than a 1 or 2 year budget. We can't let things like pension obligations and capital improvement fester. We have a lot of negative financial trends that are not being addressed, and they won't be addressed without long-term planning. While I feel that the challenges on the horizon are largely financial, and that's my area of expertise, there's more to serving on the city council. We need to be able to see the big picture. We need to work with residents to address their ideas and concerns, and we need to sometimes help neighbors work out issues. Last summer, I participated in the city's Citizens Academy to make sure that I was looking at city operations, not just from a financial perspective, but from the big picture, and I accomplished that. I think I am the most well-rounded candidate for city council. I am focused on the financial picture and the big picture. We need forward-looking, independent thinkers to lead our city. I think we need a change in leadership, and I think this election is an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kemps?
Good evening. My name is Michael Kemps. I've been married to my wife Gemma for 23 years, and at 17 years old, I launched a technology firm that spans 3 cities. We employ 50 and have been profitable for 30 years. Integrity, accountability, and respect guide my life. I believe this is a change election. The character of Palos Verdes Estates is at risk. Our city is an ecological jewel. Our incumbents support urbanizing our city with increased density and risks to our natural beauty. First, they voted to appeal a case where a judge said that our city and homes association wrongly sold parkland. Now, $345,000 later, they want us to believe that their poison pill settlement didn't sell parkland. It did. They enabled the sale of 1.3 acres of parkland to a private party, which frankly never would have happened if the city attorney had not spearheaded the idea, as then Mayor Byrd disclosed publicly in 2012. Now they want to disregard our CC&Rs and deed restrictions again. They almost passed a new ordinance, and that would enable secondary dwelling units and flipping garages into rentable apartments. The plan was hidden in a consent agenda, and it was designed to bypass the Planning Commission. Beyond this, they planned on altering the natural habitat of Lanada Bay Cliffs with no resident endorsement. Again, this election is about changing our trajectory. We have a colossal failure of leadership, which was broken trust with residents. Trust must be restored with truth. While the city has been arguing about the definition of debt and deficits, our reserves have been depleted, our pension debt nearly doubled, and our deed restrictions were placed at risk. We need solutions instead of rhetoric. I'm committed to protecting our resources and telling you the truth.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Good evening. I'm Jennifer King. I've lived here for 20 years. I've raised my family here, and I'm just finishing my first term on the City Council. By way of background, I served on both the Parklands Committee and the Planning Commission before I decided to file for election in 2015. I'm very proud of what our City Council has accomplished during the past 4 years. We focused on resident engagement. We've created 4 new advisory committees. We created the Citizens Academy, and we conducted the first ever city survey, which has been helpful in prioritizing resources. We have also enhanced transparency. We've updated our website and content and format. We've implemented new programs, OpenGov and Questus, which are basically digital file cabinets of our financial information, as well as all our records, ordinances, minutes, resolution, available to you anytime. And I personally have been available to meet with you one-on-one or in small groups, by phone or by email, to answer your questions or to find those answers. And I've met with many of you in the room here. We've also been a fiscally conservative council. We've balanced our operating budget every year. We have incurred no debt. And despite the failure of Measure D to gain a 2/3 majority, which meant we lost $5 million that we will never recover, we have maintained over $10 million in reserves. And we've done that by making significant cuts in our operating budget, including the police budget, by eliminating, deferring, or extending certain capital projects. We have formed the Finance Advisory Committee to help us engage in long-range planning, recognizing that increasing pension liability and ongoing infrastructure needs will in the future cause our expenses to outpace our revenues. So why am I running for re-election? I love our city. I've worked hard to protect it, but I see that there are challenges ahead presented by state mandates, rising pension costs, and our infrastructure needs. But these can also present an opportunity for us to work together as a community to engage in a thoughtful process as we figure out how to meet these challenges without sacrificing the community character that's at the heart of our city. In short, I want to work with you to protect and preserve our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move into questions, and I think rather than go automatically with Mr. McGowan beginning, perhaps we can start with Mr. McCarthy, and then we'll go down the line there. So the first question asks the following. The city's general fund balance committed for emergency contingencies is established at $7.2 million. In your opinion, is this emergency reserve level too much, too little, or about right? If it is not about right, why? And what would you do about it?
Wow. I don't have a good handle on what the city needs as far as a reserve. I know the reserve has been higher, and we had to draw down on that because of the failure of Measure E. But there's a lot of things to consider with the pension, with the budget. I'm kind of at a loss, so I'm going to defer to.
Okay, Ms. Peterson?
First of all, our reserves is actually at $9 million. It's 50% of our operating budget by policy. And this is something that we've actually directed to the FAC to do a study to see if there's too much money in our reserves and if we can use some of that money to pay down unfunded liabilities or put it in infrastructure. But as the FAC had already discussed, 50% may be the right amount for now. So since they're the experts, I would think that that's what they've already done their investigation. So I would say that I would agree with the 50% policy. So I don't think it's too little or too much.
Okay, Ms. Lozey?
I get to put my city treasurer hat on a little bit. So the policy is 50% of the budget with a minimum of the 7.2 million. Just maybe clarify that, who was asking the question. So it's true, the Finance Committee has been looking at the proper reserve level. I am very conservative. So to me, a 50% reserve is the minimum number. And, you know, if it were up to me, we'd have a full year, we'd have 12 months reserve, but that's probably a dream down the line. My issue with this topic is that I think there's a little bit of testing by the city manager and city staff, and maybe a little bit on the current city council, wondering if we can't reduce that reserve level so maybe they can grab some money to do something else, and I would be opposed to that. We need to keep 50% is a minimum reserve, and we can't all of a sudden grab $1 or $2 million out of there and deflect it to something else. I would absolutely be opposed to that.
Mr. Kemps?
I'm concerned that the size of our reserves are depleting. And as they continue to deplete, we have long-term pension liabilities that no one seems to want to refer to as debt. And those pension liabilities are reported over a year ago at $15 million. They're probably more like 17. So the reality is we may need even more reserves. Our FAC is putting together long-term budgets. We haven't had those. And in putting those budgets together and watching their meetings, they don't have room for infrastructure and for capital improvement before they hit a bottom line that's close to zero. So I'm concerned with our reserves. I'm concerned with the fact that they're being depleted. As to the actual amount of percentage of reserve, I think I would defer to them to actually hear the answers.
Okay, Ms. King?
The 7.2 million is a minimum threshold. We do have a policy of keeping a 50% of our operating budget as a reserve, and our fund actually tends to exceed that level. We have asked the Financial Advisory Committee to help us engage in a reserve study to see if that's an appropriate amount. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that a 2-month reserve is appropriate. I think that probably because of the topography of our city and other risks that our city might have that are unique to us, that somewhere between a 2 and a 6-month might be appropriate. And that would enable us to use perhaps a small amount of that reserve to pay down pension liability or for other infrastructure needs. But again, I wouldn't do that unless we had a full study that had confirmed that something below 50% is appropriate. And again, I don't think we would ever go as low as 20%. I think the 7.2 million is probably a good minimum threshold. The question is above that.
Okay, Mr. McGowan?
As a member of the Financial Advisory Committee, we have been studying it, and the 50% number today is approximately $9 million out of the 10 that was referred to earlier. We are still having a very difficult time having excess cash from our general fund in order to fund our infrastructure needs, the capital improvement fund, or have money available to pay down any of the accrued unfunded liabilities. We recently did an analysis. The FAC reviewed it in its last meeting. We've agreed to table the measure about any potential reduction from the 50% until we get further information and further studies done as to what our needs are in the future. We are very much concerned that taking it below 50% would put serious pressure on the community.
Thank you. Since the FAC, or the Financial Advisory Committee, has been mentioned, there is a question here regarding that. It says, it asks, what is your position regarding the role of the FAC? Do you feel that the FAC is currently receiving appropriate support from the council to carry out that role? If no, what charges would you advocate? So I guess Ms. Peterson, if you begin.
Council actually created the FAC about a year ago. That was also to help us with, we have a lot of experts in our community. And so we wanted to utilize the experts in our community to not only increase community engagement, but as well as help us in the parts that we're not as strong in. So I think that the FAC has been given very clear directions because we wanted them to, like we were talking about earlier, study the reserves. We wanted to have them dive into the pension plans. We wanted them to do inventory and capital asset inventories and infrastructure inventory, and seeing the big picture, seeing what our budget needs will be in 5 years, and maybe not so far as 10 years because anything could change, a lot of things could change. But we gave them a lot of directions, and so far I think they've been performing really well. I think there needs to be more dialogue happening between the FAC and the council and the city staff. Right now, the FAC I'm told to stop.
Finish the sentence, it's okay.
I think the FAC is heading towards the right direction. I think there could be some improvements as far as the collaboration, but I'm pretty happy with the results so far.
Thank you. Victoria?
So when I became treasurer, this was another thing I was surprised to find when I was elected, and I said, "Where's the finance committee?" And then I discovered there was no finance committee. I couldn't believe it, and so I think the response I got from the city council was, "Well, we're the finance committee," which, 3 lawyers and a doctor and a real estate agent to me didn't scream finance committee. So we went around in circles for a while, got a finance committee formed, and I do feel that the city council initially supported that. I think they didn't. They didn't want a citizens group being the finance committee. But then I think we had 33 great candidates that we interviewed, and I think they kind of got on board. But then where it went off was I think the city staff really put up the roadblocks for the finance committee. And then all of a sudden the city council didn't support it. And then this thing's been at loggerheads for months. It's frustrating, I think, to the committee because they can't get work done. They're people, all corporate people, used to working and getting things done. Sorry, Renata.
Mr. Kemps?
We have wonderful citizens that have joined that finance committee, and when I first got involved, I was curious, and so I explored and met with 3 of them. And I can share with you that they're so frustrated and they feel completely and totally handcuffed. And they're desperately trying to help and trying to analyze and trying to make a difference. And they feel that the city manager and the council are not giving them and enabling them with the power to actually contribute and support. I've heard stories about those that are on the FAC trying to actually collaborate with staff and sit down with them and actually assist them when they're challenged with time to work through issues. And that's been refused. So it feels like it's been a constant tug of war, and I'd love to see it resolved, and I'd love to contribute to that.
Ms. King?
We did form the Finance Advisory Committee about a year ago. We've got some great people on it. We didn't really have a model for it. We had some direction in terms of what the City Council wanted them to accomplish, but we didn't have a model for this committee. And so there definitely was some push and pull in terms of how they would work. What's been happening is that they want to do the source work. They want to create their own work product. That works very unlike any of our other committees where the staff creates the work and the advisory committee actually reviews it. So this was an entirely new model for the committee, for the staff, and for the city council. But we've worked over the months, and now I think we do have the committee has a very good working relationship with our finance director. We have gotten into the routine where, in fact, the committee is creating their own work product, and then staff is reviewing it. So it's a little different than any committee that we have, but we've had to accommodate that. And I think that's maybe some of the tension that the questioner was asking about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McGowan?
Well, as a member of the Finance Advisory Committee, I can speak firsthand about it. My biggest problem is a lack of urgency, a lack of a sense of urgency. All 5 of us think the same way on the committee. I will tell you they're great people, and we have seen with our fiscal vision that we are hitting some crossroads, and we want to make accelerated analysis done so that we can make decisions to begin to save and put money away and spend appropriately today because we see something coming in the horizon. We've got a long-range financial model we began to roll out to our committee at the last meeting. We hope to do it again on the 26th of February with the full city council, and it's going to share an ability to test sensitivities and to look at those competing alternatives. Do we fund down or pay down some of the unaccrued liability, or do we put money into the capital improvement fund for infrastructure needs or some other option? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Hey, so I can tell you that I look to the FAC for a great resource for me. Like my colleagues, I've met with several members of the FAC, and they all admit that there were struggles in the beginning of that process. I also sit on the Traffic Safety Committee, and quarterly we meet with the mayor with all the committees, and we all give updates. We had a meeting, I think it was just last week, and the FAC was present. They provided an update. They were very positive, and they talked about a 5- and 10-year projection for our budget that they expect to come out, I think, at the end of the month, actually, for city council. So I think it's a great resource. I think it was great putting that committee together. And with anything that you start, there's always struggles at the beginning. There's bumps in the road, and at the end of the day, they all get worked out. And so I think it's a valuable committee, and I'm looking forward to hearing what their projections are.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we begin now with Victoria. Ms. Losey, the next question, one more finance question. Do you consider the PVE annual budget to be balanced when it annually underpays the CalPERS obligation and borrows additional funds from the city reserves?
Oh, boy, that's a big one. Okay. So it's balanced. This is a hard one. So the city budget is balanced on an operating basis for the money that comes in. We spend the money, but we have to take from reserves when we want to contribute to infrastructure spending. Something's buzzing. Are you guys hearing? Oh, is that you? I'm sorry, that's Betty's watch buzzing away. Oh, it's your phone? No? Okay, sorry, so sorry. So do I consider the budget balanced? I think we have an operating, we balance, the general fund is balanced. That's like our checking account. So we put the money in, we spend money, but when we run out of money in the general fund, we have to take from our reserve funds to pay for things like infrastructure, capital spending, other funds for equipment replacement. So from that perspective, we take out of our savings to put into our checking account. So I don't call that balanced at the end of the day.
Mr. Kemps.
Two issues in addition to what Victoria just said. If you think about your home life, you have a checking account and a savings account, and when one gets drained and one runs out, and you're transferring back and forth to Rob, Peter versus Paul, is that a balanced budget? No. On top of it, we have accruing long-term pension liabilities, which in fact turns into debt. We're not paying it off every year. It's growing at a rate of over 7%, and we do not have a balanced budget.
Ms. King.
Government accounting is very tricky. It's based on fund accounting. So yes, we do have a balanced operating budget every year. We don't take money from reserves to pay for other things. We take them from accounts that are earmarked for that particular purpose. So if we're doing a sewer project, we take it from the sewer fund. Those funds can't be used for anything else except that project. If we're doing a capital project, we take it from the capital fund. If we're replacing equipment, we take it from the equipment replacement fund. So we're not taking it from reserves. The reserves that we were talking about earlier are a completely separate fund, and the only time that we have had to go into reserves is the year that Measure D failed. And at that point, even though we lost $5 million, we only took $1.2 million from our reserves. In terms of our pension liability, again, that liability is growing at an exponential rate, thanks in large part to CalPERS that has taken their investment losses and foisted them on all their member cities. Again, I'm hoping that we can, in our next budget, allocate some money to pay down that unfunded liability.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan.
I'm not going to repeat what everyone else has just said about the balanced budget, but I will just cite a couple of statistics for you. Our overall fund balances, all the assets of the city has declined 25% in the last 6 years. What concerns me the most is that we are not generating enough surpluses in our operating fund in order to properly fund our capital improvement reserve fund. Our capital reserve fund is projected to be at $1.7 million 5 months from today, at the end of June 30th. We spend $2.5 to $3 million annually on maintenance and capital improvements out of that fund. We don't have enough resources where our revenues and exceed our expenses in order to properly fund that or do any type of pay down on unaccrued liabilities.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
Yes, for intent and purposes of this budget, I believe the budget is balanced. But there's some concerns with the current budget balance. We only pay the minimum into our pension deficit. We didn't put any funds towards the capital improvements, and there are no funds towards equipment and replacement. So although this budget appears balanced to me, going forward, I think we're going to have some issues, like my colleague said, because we're not filling those other terms.
Okay, going on to a more personal question, if you will.
I don't think Betty answered.
Betty got.
Oh, I'm sorry, Betty, sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay. So as far as the balanced budget, as long as we're making more revenue than we're expensing, we're considered balanced. But however, it is true that we don't have as much money to put into our infrastructure improvements. We don't have enough money to look forward in the long term. I think those are very important things to consider. As long as we can pay for our our daily operations, to me, it's not robbing Peter to pay Paul, because at the end of the day, those are all still city's money. Having a long-term projection, like I said, is still important. The only time we actually tapped money out of the reserves was when we lost Measure D. And luckily we had Measure E, or else we would have lost another $5 million and another $5 million. So it's good that we have 50% for a rainy day like that. But as far as the balance is concerned in governmental accounting, we are balanced.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Kemps, this is a question. Did any of you grow up in Palos Verdes Estates, and what does that mean to you?
I'm sorry, ask the question again?
Did any of you grow up in Palos Verdes Estates, and what does that mean to you, if you did, I guess?
Any of you. I didn't hear the first part. I apologize. I grew up in Rancho Palos Verdes.
It's okay, I'm from there.
I didn't mean it as an elitist answer. I'm sorry. I love both cities, so respectfully, there it is. I grew up in Rancho Palos Verdes, went through all schools. Absolutely love our cities. I've actually spent most of my adult life with my family in Palos Verdes Estates, so nothing against RPV. I absolutely love it, and I love our nature and everything else that goes with it. As a child, I didn't fully appreciate it. I got to go to Malaga Cove School, and now we only have administrators there. So I absolutely love our city, is the answer.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Orange County, and my husband grew up in the Midwest. But when our oldest of our 3 children was starting kindergarten, we were looking for a community that was very much like where we grew up, where we went to our neighborhood school and where we knew all our neighbors. And we were so thrilled that we were able to find that in Palos Verdes Estates. Again, that 5-year-old who was starting kindergarten is now 25. And I think when she gets to the point where she's having children, she would love to come back to Palos Verdes Estates here. So it's been a wonderful home for us.
Mr. McGowan?
I did not grow up in Palos Verdes either. I came from a little place called Minnesota, and based upon the weather reports of the last few weeks, we're glad we're out here and not back there. But all kidding aside, I grew up in a community very similar to Palos Verdes Estates, albeit it was a suburb of Minneapolis. It was not on the ocean. And when we got transferred here 23 years ago, we thought we had died and gone to heaven.
Okay. Mr. McCarthy?
I did not grow up in Palos Verdes. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, you Wiley?
Get out.
Very similar to this. I moved out here in 1980 to join the Los Angeles Police Department. I got here on a Friday. I started on Monday. I met my wife in 1985. We had an apartment down on the Esplanade, and we used to look up at the hill and see all the sparkling lights and say, hey, one day we want to live up there. And 3 houses later, 21 years ago, we were able to get in when the recession hit. It was actually a good time to buy. Raised my girls here. Great place to live. I treasure the parklands. I love the openness. It's wonderful. New Yorkers come out to visit and they want to come back, and I have to tell them no. But that's great. Yes, great place to live.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson?
I was actually born in Taiwan and moved to the United States in 1989. My first city was La Cañada, and after being there for about a year, my parents decided that they wanted to get closer to the ocean, but still find a place that has just a tremendous school district, so we moved here. Growing up here, it's always quiet and boring, and gosh, I can't wait to get out of here. But after I had children, we knew that this is the best place to be. Again, the school's great. We have we're one of the safest cities in the country, and also we were voted the #1 place to live in California by USA Today. So what could be, wrong with being here? So I love the city, and this is why I wanted to run and wanted to contribute and wanted to give back to the community that I love so much. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Losey?
So I did not grow up in Palos Verdes Estates. I grew up in Hollywood Riviera, right down the street. The thing I remember most about Palos Verdes High School, I played basketball in high school, and I remember I don't know why, 35 or 40 years later, I remember a basketball game at PV High. So that was my best memory there. I actually, my husband and I have moved here 10 years ago. And kind of the same reasons as other people said. We were in Manhattan or Redondo Beach, and I remember walking on the Strand and looking up at the hill and thinking, geez, I've traveled the whole world for that view and that feeling. And wow, it was there the whole time. I felt like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And so when we were when our kids were more middle school and high school, we really thought we needed to make a firmer decision on schools, and we looked here first. And then also just when you drive up the hill, you just feel that it's special, and you feel the open space, and you know that makes it a special place, and that's how we landed here.
Okay, next one. I think we have parents with children who are here, and this question is, I am an 8th grader at PV Intermediate School. What are the biggest risks to me and my friends growing up in this community, and what will you do about it? So,
That's a great question.
Ms. King.
Thank you for that question. What are the biggest risks? I guess we do see that on occasion, I think maybe it was Betty who was saying it seemed kind of slow and boring when she was growing up here as a teenager. And when things are slow and boring, teenagers try to find things that are new and exciting. And so that is a risk, certainly. We, as a city council, in part tried to address that risk by enacting a social host ordinance, which holds parents responsible for having parties in their home, for serving alcohol to underage students or providing them with illegal drugs. And so I think that is one of the biggest risks, that you might be influenced by your friends to participate in that. But really, it's the adults here in the room who should be watching out for that. And hopefully through the social host ordinance and through talking with your neighbors and communicating with parents, that will be much less of a risk for you.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan?
I think one of the biggest risks for an 8th grader and his or her parents is the intergenerational transfer of that I project with regards to our finances. This age group is utilizing the assets of our community. We're not putting adequate reserves away to pay for replacement and improvement into the future. And our kids, our grandkids, and our great-grandkids need to look at Palos Verdes Estates in perpetuity. And we need to be providing today for their future. And I think that's where I would put the biggest risk.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
We live in a bubble. Our kids are raised here, and if they go to school here and they do everything on the Hill, there's a life out there that's different than this Hill. So my wife and I spend a lot of time talking to the girls about what life is like off the Hill, which they're going to spend a lot of time. So I think life lessons about what goes on out there versus here, traffic, young drivers, like Jennifer said, drinking. There's a whole bunch of things that you really need to take into account, but really be aware of life other than on the Hill.
Ms. Peterson?
I think not just 8th graders or high school kids are dealing with this. I think actually the adults are dealing with this too. Social media. Social media and kindness and how we treat each other is one of the biggest risks I think that we are facing right now. Not just finances and whatnot, because that's different city, different day. But here, I had to actually have conversations with my children saying that, mommy's being attacked on social media for no really good reason. And so we were planning to go to the golf course to have one of these PVE Eats with the mayor. And I said, there might be people that are coming up to mommy and saying not nice things to me, but that who's important to me and whose opinion that I value the most. And that to me is actually one of the biggest risks that we have, because people are not so nice to each other nowadays, and we really need to change that.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey?
Well, I have to say the first thing that popped in my mind when you said, what's the biggest risk to 8th graders? Crazy parent drivers. That's the one that pops into my mind. And I think it's also fresh in my mind because I was at a meeting yesterday with people who live near one of the elementary schools, and they no longer have kids in school, but that was a huge concern to them. It's just that, they lived on a street that I think because of the the cycle of the drop-off, their street became the one that people were kind of whipping down and turning around and heading the other way to get their kids dropped off on the wrong side of the road. I live near PVIS, and I see all kinds of crazy things, including sometimes people almost running over their own kid. So, slow down. But I do think that is an issue for our police, in all seriousness. I think that's something that we probably need to do a little bit better job of asking our police to monitor around the schools, because I think that's a big risk area.
Thank you. Mr. Camps.
I'm going to camp on to a couple of the other issues and add the first one that came to my head. I'm in technology, and so by default, I say, we're isolated already on the Hill, and there's pluses and minuses to that. But what contributes to that isolation is our kids' use of technology, in particular texting and withdrawing and being in their holes, if you will. And I think, Betty made some comments about, being kind to each other, et cetera. And I'll add to that. I think it's easier to hide behind the technology, and it's easier to withdraw and not be as social. And so I'd like to see the community having offerings. We really don't have a single park in our city. And I realize that we have financial challenges and affordability issues, but it would be nice to see either the city or the school district somehow come together, GoFundMe, do something to pull kids out of their texting holes and into playgrounds.
Thank you. Since we're talking about social media, we have a question about that. It says, given the challenge of dialogues on social media sites, what is the best way council should communicate their message? And we begin with Mr. McCarthy, I believe.
I think it's.
Do I have it wrong?
McGowan, I think.
Mr. McGowan,
Can you
sorry.
repeat the question?
Sure.
Please.
Given the challenge of dialogues on social media sites, what is the best way council should communicate their message?
Well, I think the council needs to do more town meetings. I think we've got a lot of issues within our city that we need to have some town hall get-togethers, and we need to lay out in a complete open book manner the competing resources and competing items that we need to fund with those resources. And it's best, in my mind, I'm maybe old school in the fact that I like to meet with people one-on-one or in groups such as this, rather than to try to take a distorted snippet out of a Twitter or a text message, which many times gets misconstrued, and you many times also don't know who the author is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGowan.
Okay, I'm McCarthy, but I'll go.
Oh, no.
We're
Mr.
close.
McCarthy, yeah, right.
don't have to
You
stop
both
my
begin
clock.
with MC, so,
Switch seats.
sorry.
So I agree with Dave on a lot of that, but I think we need a social media component. We have a lot of young residents and kids we want to get the message out to, so I think we need to tap all those social media things, the Twitter, the Snapchat, the Facebook, the EIEIO, whatever's out there. I think we need to tap all those resources to get the message out.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Peterson.
So the best way to communicate with, there's depending on what demographics we're talking about, right? So I know there are people that are so used to getting newsletters and they're not anymore because we're only doing newsletters once a quarter. So we need to keep that going. There's definitely a social media component of this, but the city is now utilizing more Facebook and more Twitter. Sign up for our accounts if you haven't. But I think the most valuable thing is still picking up the phone or talking to people face to face. Talk to the source. There are so many people that are having misinterpretations or misinformations that are just out there. And when you read it 7 times, sometimes it becomes the truth that you live in. So to me, that's not a very good way to communicate. Call, write emails, face to face. This is also why I started doing the monthly walk and talk with the mayor, so we can have this face to face dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Malozzi?
So I think that the communication from the city council out to the residents is a multi-pronged approach, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So after Measure D failed, we had engaged the Davenport Institute, which is the public policy arm of Pepperdine University wanted to, actually, we were an interesting test case, which I'm not sure you wanted to be an interesting test case, but they thought that we were a city that could use help with its communication. So, for example, if you want public input on an issue, so I think when it's budget season and we're trying to figure out how to allocate our precious dollars, you need a town hall type forum so that people can come and give input. I think social media, is only really good if you're trying to have an outward message. So I need to tell you something and here it is. I also think the city website and newsletters need to be better, more dynamic ways of, it is another way of informing, but I think those could be much better tools.
Okay, Mr. Kemp.
So all the above is cumulative. Let me add to it. I think Facebook Live would be tremendous. I think that when you think of social media, you think, oh, young demographic only. But I think Facebook is actually starting to mix those demographics, and that an older population is starting to pay attention and to use that, whereas our kids look at us and they say, Facebook, you're crazy, I'm not using that. So that means it's working to me. So that's a wonderful one. Town halls are so important, and I don't see enough of them. And another to add is I'm frequently attending city council meetings as a member of the public today, and I tend to see the same faces over and over again. I think we need to actually encourage people to come because they're frustrated and they're seeing things in social media, et cetera, and they're not participating. So I'd love to actually see them here.
Okay, Ms. King.
I think this is something the City Council can definitely improve on. I think we need to ask the questions when we're trying to communicate with our residents. Who are we trying to communicate with, and what's the purpose of the communication? The who in our city is very different. We have residents that consume information in many different ways. So I think we need to use a variety of sources. We need to use the newspaper, our newsletter, some types of social media, the social media that's coming from our city, emails. Some people have told me they would like more text, so we can do that lots of different ways. We also have engaged the Davenport, not just for Measure D, but to improve our citizen engagement and communication. And so the whys are, are we just trying to inform residents? Do we want to consult with residents, or do we want to collaborate with them? And so depending on the purpose of the communication, there are many different forums that we can use in terms of focus groups or town hall meetings or one-on-one conversations, depending on the purpose of the communication.
Thank you. Okay, I've got it right now. Mr. McCarthy, right? Okay. Going back to some city issues, some complain that PVE codes are not enforced in regard to landscaping, weeds, home maintenance, unfinished construction, etc. Others feel the city is too strict about code enforcement and that their property rights are being infringed upon. What is your take? Is the current level of code enforcement appropriate, or do we need stricter or looser code enforcement? Mr. McCarthy.
The city has limited resources with respect to code enforcement, and I can just see that on the Traffic Safety Committee. In the Traffic Safety Committee, we get complaints about speed. They want speed bumps. They want stop signs. They want crosswalks. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to money. There's only so much you can do. So I think the Parklands Committee needs to work with the City Council and see if we can come out and kind of prioritize what some of the bigger issues are and focus resources towards that.
Okay, Ms. Peterson.
I agree with Kevin. We only have a part-time code enforcement officer as of right now. And there are a lot of things that we can't, even though we have policies that we need to enforce, we don't have the manpower to get there. So it's utilizing the resources and finding out the priorities and actually going back to council to see if there's anything that, if we're just not enforcing it, why are we actually, keeping that as part of our policy? And on top of that, I think as the demand grows, we might need to appropriate some more money and maybe get a full-time code enforcement officer. It really depends on what the priority of the council is and the priority of our community as well.
Okay, Ms. Losey.
It seems to me on this, I understand that we have a part-time code enforcement officer, but for me, the issue is just consistency and fairness. And my observation is if you know how to work the system, you get away with a little bit and you kind of maybe get a little more than what's fair to everybody else. So I think it has to be fair, and I think maybe we do have to apply more resources. I can't say if this part-time code enforcement officer is very busy or not busy at all. So I'd have to have an observation on that. But to me, if we have a rule that's, no enforcement in the parklands, then the rule is no enforcement in the parkland. It's not for some people and not for others, and this one's okay because it's not really bothering anybody, but that one's not okay. So I have an issue with that, and I think all the rules have to be applied uniformly, consistently, and fairly across all our residents.
Mr. Kemps.
I hear a lot of frustration from residents on this, in particular around trees and cutting and controlling. I heard a story from a resident that had been actually suing their neighbor, which is unbelievably sad, because the city would not actually come and enforce an ordinance. So I understand the financial challenges, and I understand the part-time issues, but I think we need a greater focus on this. And so in direct answer to your question, I think it's a little bit too light.
Okay, Ms. King.
Our policy, which we've instructed for our code enforcement officer, is that there is a tiering or a priority of enforcement issues. So first is safety, second are encroachments, and then third are complaints from other residents. We had a full-time code enforcement officer before the failure of Measure D. I think at that point we had a very good equilibrium where she was able to have time to go out and find those areas that were unsafe and make that a real priority. She left, and we did not fill that position for quite some time. Very recently, within just the last couple of months, we now have a new part-time code enforcement officer, not a pensionable position. And we've given him the same instruction in terms of safety, access, resident complaints. I'm sure that there was also a backlog of resident complaints because we went over a year without a code enforcement officer. So he is trying to balance those priorities in enforcing, and I'm sure that we'll be working with him.
Mr. McGowan.
Yes, I'll just echo what they've all said with fairness and consistency of the application of the existing ordinances. I think that's mandatory. But as we've already identified, we were operating without a code enforcement officer for a number of months. We do now have a part-time one. It becomes an issue of prioritization and dollarization. And where do we want to put our investments? And those are all decisions that we need the input from the public to help us balance those types of priorities.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson, the next question somewhat relates to this. To save money, do you think City Hall should be staffed with as many contractors as possible and the minimal number of directly employed city employees?
There are certain positions that actually can be contracted out, and there are certain that cannot. So I think there's a balance of what we can actually legally do and what we cannot. And I understand that, people are saying if we have a lot of hire-ins, then they're purseable, which I understand it's a big concern of ours. But we are utilizing part-timers that are not purseable to offset our unfunded liabilities. So I think that's something that to be considered. I know that when you contract out, there's less control that we have. So that needs to be considered as well. I don't think it's a very easy question to blanket answer.
Thank you. Ms. Losey?
I do agree with that statement or the premise of the question. I do think that we need, and this is the name of the game in city operations these days, in California at least, and that is having as few part-time or few full-time employees who are collecting full benefits and to contract as many workers as you can. I think the challenge we have is over the last 5 years or so, we've brought a lot of positions as full-time employees that previously had been contract workers, and it's going to be hard to undo that. And I think that was a mistake over the last 5 years, but we do have to have an eye toward how to undo that, because we have to going forward.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kemps?
Here's the real numbers. Between 2013 and 17, we've hired 8 employees. We've increased our headcount to 63. Our base compensation increased just shy of $1 million, and all of it is subject to pension costs. In conjunction with that, the other things we haven't addressed are our workers' comp costs. In that period went up 76%, and then in 2018 we kept going. So, yeah, I do think we're going the wrong direction. I don't want to be all negative. I want to acknowledge that, some things have to be managed and controlled. But I think in this scenario where we are all faced with such great pension challenges, that we have no choice to do this, but then to manage it effectively.
Okay, thank you, Ms. King.
We have a balance of employees and contractors in City Hall right now. Our building and planning department is pretty much all contractors. We did have a situation several years ago where we had contractors who were supervising employees, which it turns out is against the labor laws. So yes, we had to shift some of those employees, some of those positions to employee positions versus contractor positions. I do think it's advisable to use contractors where it's lawful and where it's clear that it's in the city's best interest. For example, we used to have a contract engineer. We had, when I first came on the council, a lot of people, some of whom are in the room, lobbied for a city engineer who would be solely responsible to us. And we did hire a city engineer. He's actually now the head of our building and planning department. And he, in fact, has proven to be a great asset to the city. He's gotten grants from us. He has looked out for our best interests. He has completed more projects than a contractor ever could have.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
Well, I'll just add to what everyone's been saying about outsourcing, which is a term I use, whether it be a consultant or other sharing the facilities or personnel with other areas, is only going to help us reduce our pension liabilities in the prospective future. And that is something I think we really have to take a serious look at. It also might be getting back to how we do our business. Operational analysis is something I think that really needs to be looked at throughout the whole city, and making sure that we are using the state-of-the-art techniques, technology, and outsourcing services where possible to ensure that we are achieving our results at the lowest cost possible.
Mr. McCarthy.
I'm an advocate for contracting out when appropriate. Obviously, you can't do it for all like law enforcement or public safety, that you can't contract individual people out, although you could contract an agency. I'm also not just people, I mean equipment. If there's no reason we can't lease copy machines or vehicles for certain positions. So both in the police department and in the police relief, we do a lot of professional services.
Okay, Ms. Losey, I think you're next. We have a number of questions about relating to Lunata Bay and Malaga Cove.
I'm sorry, I thought you'd missed her that time. Sorry.
No, I should have gone straight across. It would have been easier. But anyway, the question asks, what is your position on the Beautify Lunata Bay project?
Well, my position is that we need to have resident input and a wide array of resident input, not maybe just a few people that live around. A lot of people want it, a lot of people don't. So that to me is an example where we've got to have the input, and we have to create a forum for people to, to come together and decide what's optimal. Some people, there's obviously different definitions for people on what natural state means and natural plantings, and so something that causes such a high profile in the community, I just think it's critical that we get a very wide base of resident input, not just people who live in that area of Lunata Bay, but the whole city, because people from all over the city come down to those bluffs to enjoy.
Mr. Kemps.
I think when this was first looked at, I think the decisions were made too quickly. And I myself am sort of a naturalist, and I'd prefer to keep the cliffs and leave things alone. But it's not up to me. It's up to our residents. And so my preference would be to pull everyone together and to understand what they wanted. My concern is that if we do things like change paths, then maybe there's requirements for irrigation that could destroy cliffs. Maybe there's requirements for fencing that come upon us. So I really like the natural state of where we are, and that's part of the reason I live here. So my preference is not to make those changes.
Ms. King.
There were a couple of phases to the Beautify Lunada Bay project, and this is a project that's sponsored by residents. It was over a period of years, and they came for hearings in front of the Parklands Committee and in front of the City Council. I did support the first phase around Paseo Lunado. I did think that that was an improvement, and I do think that there was a lot of public involvement in that project. There was likewise a lot of public involvement in the second phase, which proposed that the plantings extend along the bluffs. I personally had a little bit of a different opinion on that. I think there was a different balance when you start landscaping the bluffs, and I wasn't all that supportive of the project. But it did come to the Parklands Committee, and that's as it should have been, so that there could be a public hearing. And the Parklands Committee heard our residents, as they should. Democracy worked. The Beautify Lunada Bay group has gone back to the drawing board, and I think they're going to have a much more modest project, if a project at all. So I think the process worked.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
Well, I first of all would like to applaud the Lunada Bay Association for, I think what they've done up there has been phenomenal improvement to the area. Now, as far as the extension of the project, I know that there's pros and cons in the neighborhood. I happen to believe that if you look at just extending that existing plantings down along Paseo del Mar and not Paseo, but Paseo Lunado, and not onto the cliffs, that's my understanding as far as they want to take it. I think trying to extend it onto the cliffs is a whole different issue, and I think it cannot be used as a cookie cutter that could be applied to other areas of the city. I think each area needs to be looked at individually, and with the residents and with the irrigation issues or safety issues or any other concerns that the residents have.
Mr. McCarthy.
So during my meet and greets, I probably had about a half a dozen people come up to me and talk about specifically that, want to know what my position was. And I really didn't know a lot about it, but the citizens' concerns were twofold. One was the cost. It's citizen funded initially, but eventually the city was going to take that on. And with the problems fiscally, they were concerned about, okay, is that going to fall back on us? And the second thing was the shrubbery, and was it going to be trimmed, and views. So the people that live down there have views right now. They don't want to lose their views. And I agree with Jennifer. The process, it went back to the Parklands Committee, and it appears the process is working.
Okay, Ms. Peterson.
So with our city facing financial limitations, I always will encourage public and private partnership. I think this is one of the cases where our community got together and figured that they wanted to improve their landscaping along the bluffs. So the community engagement part is very, very crucial. And as it has gone through the proper process, going through Parklands, coming up to the City Council, being approved for phase 1, the second phase didn't pan out so well. But with that, I'm okay with it going back to Lunada Bay Homes Association, going back to the Beautify Lunada Bay Project Committee to improve on their project and to plan out something that the community can really support behind. So wait and see. I'm excited to see what phase 2, the new improved phase 2 might be.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about Lunada Bay and Malaga Cove more specifically. PVE's housing element required by Los Angeles County allows landlords in the Malaga Cove Plaza to convert their properties to homeless shelters if they wish. This has not happened to date. How worried are you that plaza landlords will choose to convert their properties to homeless shelters in the future? Mr. Kemps.
I'm very concerned not only about Malaga Cove, but I'm actually going to transition and hit the ADU issue because I think they're similar and they're combined. I know that our state is concerned about, homelessness and wants higher density, and I understand and I'm sympathize with those concerns. But I think the reality is that we want to control, via our CC&Rs and our deed restrictions, our own lots, and we don't want those things forced upon us. So I think that we need to have a more collaborative effort between the Homes Association and the City Council, and that the City Council needs to support and acknowledge not only the existence of that Homes Association, but be more collaborative with that association to keep those controls in place.
Thank you. Ms. King.
The housing element is something that the state requires every city to do. And what it means is that in its codes, it needs to have zoning so that certain types of dwellings can be built. It's a way to address California's housing crisis. So there have to be areas where certain types of density can be built. where emergency shelters can be built. The housing element does not require the city to actually build these things. It doesn't require them to partner with a developer to build these things. It doesn't require anyone to build these things. It just means if a developer wanted to come in and put an emergency shelter in Malaga Cove, that one could. That seems highly unlikely. There are no other resources there. There's no way, the land is very expensive, so it is not going to happen. And the consequences of not complying with the housing element are shown in the recent lawsuit by the state against Huntington Beach, where Huntington Beach removed some of the density requirements from its housing element, and the state has sued, meaning that they will have to comply.
Mr. McGowan.
Yes, I'm concerned about the coordination between the Homes Association and the City Council in trying to manage these types of issues. We've got CC&Rs that are deed restricted covenants in all of our land, and I don't think we have explored to the degree that I'd like to see all the defenses that we may be able to have and still comply with the state law, because I think we are somewhat of a unique community given the fact that we do have these deed restrictions.
Mr. McGowan.
I'm McGowan. McCarthy.
Mr. McCarthy, I'm looking at you.
I know, I saw
Calling
that.
me though.
Mr. McCarthy.
So if they moved a whole bunch of homeless, made shelters and moved the homeless in, that would help the parking problem in Malaga Cove. But I agree with Jennifer. The two big issues are cost and services. It's really expensive to rent down there, and services are nowhere near Palos Verdes. So I don't think that's going to be a possibility. I don't think.
Ms. Peterson.
There are certain state mandates we have to comply with. I mean, it would affect our funding if we don't, and like what Jennifer had mentioned, that the state is actually suing Huntington Beach, and there's no way the council wants to see us getting into another lawsuit, especially fighting somebody like the state who has so much more resources than we do. I'm not too worried about homeless shelters being developed in Malaga Cove just because it's owned by private residents. They are going to do what's beneficial for them, not so much for the homeless population. And as far as the AD is concerned, answering to Michael, these are other state mandates that we have to comply with. The city is trying to make it as restrictive as possible, working in conjunction with the Homes Association. So we have two watchdogs, basically, two watchdogs to make sure that our properties don't get developed as freely as the state would like. That's what the City Council has been doing, is protecting our right to own our property, to control our property.
Thank you. Ms. Losey?
So to answer the question, I'm probably not overly concerned about homeless shelters in Malaga Cove, kind of for the reasons people gave. But for this issue, this for me is where I am concerned is, just my observation over the last couple of years is yes, the state has mandates that cities are supposed to kind of make sure that they have their own municipal code to address. But I'm not convinced that we're getting the best advice and that we should as a city. And I sometimes observe that the city staff and perhaps the city attorney have gone bent over backwards to write a municipal code that the state of California would be very happy with, but is not necessarily in our best interest. And that's where I would probably push back and say, well, I think I'd like to see something less accommodating to the state and more with our residents in mind. And I'd like to see that equation change a little bit.
Okay, we begin with Ms. King. One more question about Malaga Cove. Some get frustrated with the four-way intersection in front of the Malaga Cove Plaza due to traffic backups and rush hour periods. Would you attempt to do something about this if elected? Do you support installing a traffic signal in lieu of the current four-way stop at this busy intersection?
I'll take that last one first. No. Can I just say no? We do have in our budget a traffic study for Malaga Cove. As you saw, we did a small version of one along in front of the police station, which again showed us some unintended results. We do have money in the budget to conduct a larger traffic study to see if there's some other configuration that might alleviate some of the traffic around there during rush hour. I don't know, there's talk about a traffic circle, different things, but it's a very difficult intersection, especially for people who are not familiar with our city. And I know that there have been a handful of accidents there involving cars and bicycles. So to the extent we can do something that would alleviate traffic, but in my view, it would be more important to improve safety there, yes, I would support doing something.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
Yes, I would not support a traffic light there either, but I would support more enforcement of the laws at that intersection, because constantly you're going through that intersection and people are changing lanes at the last minute, they're not following through, and I think that is a recipe for disaster as far as accidents are concerned, as well as pedestrians. I know that there's discussion about a potential traffic circle there, which is, I think, ties into a bigger issue of how we use that land down there and whether we have the space and how it would be configured.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
So I would support a traffic study that would include the study of a traffic signal. And I'll tell you why. I mean, look at that intersection at rush hour. Cars are lined up down the street and they just wait to get through that. And so we met with, as part of the Traffic Safety Committee, we met with people from the Malaga Cove and to talk about the parking issues. And there's a parking lot right across the street from City Hall that nobody uses, and they won't use it because they can't cross the street. It's not safe to cross the street, and that's in the daytime. And really, a traffic circle isn't going to help that. So to keep all the options open and to keep give the residents all the options to choose from, I think it merits a traffic study, which would include a traffic signal as part of the study.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson.
I think this would be a great topic for the community engagement piece for the Davenport Institute. I know there are a lot of people that want to keep PVE the way it is, no lights, dark skies, and everything. But as the time moves, and with Terranea being a lot of people's destinations and the safety becomes more of a concern, I really, really wonder how our community would feel to have some better safety mechanisms put out there. So maybe it's not a traffic signal, maybe it is a traffic signal, but I think that's something that the community would be able to help us in deciding that. I am for having a traffic circle at where the triangle is to help alleviate that traffic nightmare. But also, we have to consider unintended consequences. Is that going to make people speed faster? Is that going to allow more traffic coming through our city? So those are all traffic studies that we need to consider.
Thank you. Ms. Losey.
In my family, we call that the bad intersection. So when my husband calls and says, I'm almost home from work, I'm at the bad intersection. So one of the things, in the morning, so there was a preliminary traffic study, but it seemed like when that was presented to City Council, and that's been a while, it's probably been a year, they kind of threw their hands up and said, I don't know. So, but, in the morning, the traffic cop works well in the morning. Seems like we ought to be able to find a model where we could get the traffic cop to work in the afternoon. I don't know about a traffic study that includes a light. I mean, it seems like if you're going to do a study, you have to probably think of everything. But for the safety and better law enforcement, I guess it also is mind-boggling to me that people do the awful, illegal, and unsafe things that happen in that intersection, and it's right in front of the police department. And how are we not pulling, it seems to me, from a city revenue perspective, if we just park a cart there and give everybody a ticket that does a dumb thing. So that, to me, has got to be improved.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kemps.
I love the idea of the enforcement increase. That's phenomenal. I'll say I also love transparency, and I'd love to have a traffic study. I'd love to see it. But I will go down kicking and screaming over a traffic light. There is just no way. As to the rest of it, I'd be open to a traffic circle, I suppose, if it worked right, to bring those two sides together. I love the idea of the additional parking lot. It definitely is a challenge. I live in Malaga Cove, so I live it with you. But I care more about our character and our city and the way that it looks and the uniqueness of that plaza than I do the frustrations over the traffic. So I think we have to find the right balance, and we definitely have to have transparency and community input.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan, this question asks, what is your position on the Butcher Solano project? Butcher Hill Solano project?
Well, number one, it's a Torrance decision ultimately, but the residents in Belmonte have expressed a lot of concern over potential traffic that would come up through the Via Belmonte area, which I haven't seen the traffic studies or really understand the volume of traffic that would be coming up there. It's my understanding that most of that traffic would be fed on to Hawthorne and not come up through Palos Verde Estates, because I'm not sure what direction they would be going if they were headed in that from this proposed project. And I think that we, as a city, need to take a look at the environmental impact study that's currently being drafted. It's not done yet, but I think we're going to have very little clout with the city of Torrance. We can have some discussions with them, but I believe that our hands are going to have to be dealt with by Torrance.
Okay, thank you.
But there's no reason we can't consult our traffic engineer to see how we can reconstruction the streets, work with our city attorney to see if there's an ordinance we can put in to make it more difficult to drive through, take shortcuts. But we really need to work with Torrance. Most of the traffic, like Dave said, is going to be coming down the hill, going down Hawthorne Boulevard. And what we need to do is work with Torrance for the timing of the lights. Well, the last thing you need to do is, they hit every light. I mean, if they time the lights right, the traffic will flow. That's really how I see it.
Thank you. Ms. Peterson?
When the residents around Via Belmonte first came up to the council and wanted us to do something about it, I said the only thing that we could really do, this is prior to the Torrance City Council election, is to talk to the city council candidates to see who supports it and who doesn't. And if they wanted some of our endorsement, we would go with the people that wouldn't want to support the Butcher Solana project. So as the previous two candidates have mentioned, this is the Torrance jurisdiction. The only thing that we can really fight on is when they come up with their environmental impact report to challenge their sincerity, challenge their data, to make sure that whatever their report is, it actually is telling the truth. Because right now they're telling us there's no traffic impact. They're telling us there's no air quality impact. They're telling us there's no noise quality impact, but I don't think that's true. So once that report comes down, then we have some grounds to stand on and challenge the developers. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey?
So I think our residents are looking to our city council for help. And I think people over and over again come to a city council meeting and say, we need help, we need help. We have this situation, this development that's going to hurt our city. And our city council, existing city council keeps saying, oh, take it up with Torrance. That's not an answer. You need somebody who's going to help you fight the fight. Go talk to Torrance, wait for the environmental impact report. Well, now you're leaving these residents out there trying to kind of come up with their own grassroots effort of how to deal with this thing. Okay, I don't know, maybe the rules are we have to wait. Maybe step one is you have to wait for this report to come out. I don't know. But I know that we got to fight for our residents, and we got to be willing to say, okay, let's look at it. Let's see. I know there was a community forum, and maybe the city council took some notes on that, but I have not seen the city council in any way step up and say, okay, let's make a plan.
Yes.
Excuse me. Mr. Kemps?
Here comes some more yes. So I went and sat down with them because there are a lot of people in Belmonte that are really, 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 really upset about this. We chatted about some ideas where we can actually contribute. First of all, a bit of warning. When that environmental impact study comes out, we have 45 days to respond to that study before it proceeds forward in the city of Torrance. So we can yell, scream, holler, write letters, et cetera, but we're only going to have 45 days. We can get ahead of it. We can develop an objective study. We could use a prelim environmental report to start working on that response. Maybe develop our own objective assessments. We can look at the traffic flow at Hawthorne Boulevard where Via Belmonte hits it. Some other thoughts is, maybe we locate a very sharp land use attorney and understand what our own city options are, rather than just assuming that it's Torrance and nothing else. The other thing I think we can do is we can form partnerships with our other cities in Palos Verdes because we aren't going to be the only ones concerned.
Ms. Lozey?
Ms. King.
Ms. King. Ms. King. Thank you.
We have heard from residents on this project, and initially we did start, we had a forum with the developer and the residents so the residents could learn more about the project. We did take residents' concerns on at that forum, and we had an online portal for residents to express their concerns. So we do have some idea of what the issues will be when the environmental impact report is ready. Until that impact report is prepared, we don't know how Torrance has chosen to mitigate some of those impacts that we've been talking about: traffic, noise. And so until we know what they've done to try to mitigate them, there's really no point in our responding. And if we responded now, we do lose credibility, because then it would just be shown we weren't going to like anything they tried to do. We are ready for when that report comes in. We have a noise engineer prepared, a traffic engineer. We have a large law firm that has land use attorneys that can look at that and evaluate and see what is the most effective response to that report when it comes in, what will convince the Torrance City Council that the impacts haven't been adequately mitigated.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to some questions regarding the parklands, which we really haven't touched on in detail yet. Some feel like the trails in our parklands need to be better maintained or even expanded. Others don't like seeing people walking on the trails and advocate for less or only limited public access in parklands. Where do you stand when it comes to public access to parkland trails and the role of the city in maintaining trails and parklands? Mr. McCarthy.
Well, we can't limit access to parklands. The purpose of them being parklands is everybody has access. The second thing is the maintenance. It goes back to one of the other topics we talked about. The first thing you need to look at is, because of our limited resources, again, it comes back to money. Because of our limited resources, it comes back to the things we look at is safety, and then easy use. So I think everybody should have access to the parklands. I think that the city needs to take a look at any of the safety issues, low-lying branches, maybe roots that come up from the ground where people can trip and fall. But I treasure the parklands. It's one of the reasons I moved up here and I live up here, and I'd like to see them maintained and used.
Okay, Ms. Peterson.
I think we should preserve our natural beauty and not overdevelop our trails. My kids and my husband and I would try to hike a different trail, once a month or something. And it's nice to be out in nature, even though we're so close to the city. If we were to develop them and, groom them or make sure that the roots are not sticking out and all that stuff, I think that takes away from what the natural beauty is. And in turns, if the city starts maintaining these trails and make them true public trails and have them mapped out and all that, it becomes the city's liability, because now we're maintaining them, and how dare we not keep them safe? So I think it's best just to keep it as is and let people explore themselves.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Losey.
Yep, I think we need, the parklands are for access for everyone without encroachments. I guess I was thinking more maintenance from more of a safety perspective and a fire. I do think, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish and under maintain. Now we've had a lot of rain, but in the dry years, sometimes it seems like maybe they should be cleared a little bit better. So I don't want to throw, financial hardship and then create something that isn't properly maintained for fire, to protect against fire. So that, when I think of maintenance, that's more what I think of it as opposed to development. So, but yep, access without encroachments for all.
Mr. Kemps.
We absolutely need to maintain our natural style of our paths and our natural areas. We have to keep them cleared for fire. And the other issue that we have to be very careful about, and has been discussed recently, is pesticides. We're presently using Roundup in our city, which is a cancer-causing carcinogen, and there's been recent litigation around that, and I think we need to stop it. We need to find other methods to control that.
Okay, Ms. King.
Yes, I really do enjoy hiking our trails, and I do like them in their natural state. Of course, we do maintain the areas for fire clearance, but I think the question goes to, should we enhance the trails? Should we make them more beautiful, maybe more accessible? And that, I think, for a number of reasons, we probably aren't going to go in that direction. Of course, one is resources, another is potential liability, another is the cautionary tale presented by the intersection of Crest and Crenshaw, where lots of people enjoy those trails now. And I don't think that's an atmosphere that we necessarily want our city to have. And there's no Roundup use in the parklands.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
Well, I think we absolutely have to keep access open for these trails, but I would like to give you an example of a model that we've used in Los Angeles. I'm part of the Los Angeles Parks Foundation, one of the founding members, and we've done adopt-a-park programs in the city of Los Angeles. We'll go to an existing business and say, why don't you adopt a park for X dollars per year and maintain it. It's a model that we could use in Palos Verdes, whether it be on trails or whether it be for our parks, but it's another way of maintaining and enhancing some of our public parklands without encroaching on the budget of the city. And we do this through a 501c3 foundation, which is something that I would definitely encourage our community to reevaluate.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Peterson, we have one more parks question. There's often conflict in the city between those who believe PVE's urban forest of mature trees improves their property values and defines or contributes to neighborhood character, and those who believe that having a 180-degree unimpeded view is a right. Where do you see yourself? Are you a tree person or a view person?
Can I be both?
You can.
You know, I think trees actually add to the view. 180 degrees of unimpeded ocean view is gorgeous, but I think having the trees in there makes it even more beautiful and more natural-like. I think it really depends on the residents. You know, I'm not in your living room. I'm not looking out at your view. I cannot decide what you would determine as more valuable. And so, you know, a lot of these cases come up to the city council, and we have to take it case by case. It's not one size fits all. With that said, I know there's a couple of big trees in front of my big windows, and I'm okay with that. You know, I'm okay with having them there. And so, like I said, it's case by case. I can't say that I am a tree or a view person. I think I'm both.
Both.
Trees are part of the view.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Losey.
So that's one of mine. So for people who know me, I often say I think life is like a bell curve. And you have kind of the two extremes, but most of life happens in the middle. So you have the 180 degrees at all costs, and the tree should never be cut down. And then I think you have real life happens in the middle. And so I think you do. The thing that I think you most need is you know, neighbors need to kind of work together respectfully and collaboratively. I think you have to come into that conversation you know, willing to find a compromise, and I'd like to see that a little bit more. I think we've gotten to where people kind of go in expecting a battle, and I'd like to find a way to. And I think the Parklands Committee tries to help find the middle, but yeah, I think you have the extremes, and then most of life is in the middle, and we have to find a way to get that to work for everyone.
Mr. Kemps.
I think the other thing to add is it varies based on areas, right? So, you know, using Upper Lanada Bay, looking down at trees that are in your way of a wide expanse of open view, as opposed to, you know, Malaga Cove that maybe has fewer trees and impacts specific neighbors. I think the point about collaborating between neighbors is huge. I'll share our own story. We're remodeling a house on Villa Del Monte. We move into the house. A couple people that are neighbors look at our lot, and they look up and they say, "What do you think of that eucalyptus tree?" And my wife and I look up and say, "We love that tree," right? So everyone has different views, and I think we need to collaborate as neighbors and be willing to cut where people in front or behind us have view impacts, and we did that as good neighbors. And I think we can all get along and not have battles over it. We have enough to battle.
Okay, Ms. King.
I do think it's all about balance. I'm a tree person and a view person, and our system is a little complicated by the fact that there are two bodies that control trees and views. So we have the city process with the Parklands Committee for our public trees, and I think actually that process works really well. I've listened to several of the Parklands hearings, and people are really able to balance the trees and views, whereas private trees do go through the Homes Association, and so that's an entirely different process. I think that trees and views, it is part about being neighbors and appreciating the interests of our neighbors and really just being more neighborly. And I think a lot of our issues would be minimized if we were just all a little bit more neighborly.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan.
Well, I also agree with the balance between the trees and the views, but I do know that in the area of Lanada Bay where I live, more and more buildings or remodels have been done where the foliage has been limited to the ridge line of the house, which I think has been a big asset in maintaining some of the views and yet having the balance of the trees. There's one specific species in our neighborhood that is very much of a concern to me, and that's the canary pines, because they grow so doggone tall, and if they fall, they're going to take out some homes, as well as they already obstruct a lot of the views. And I think that this is something that we, at some point in time, need to consider.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
I agree with my colleagues. There's a balance, depending on where you live. I have trees in my backyard, and I love looking at the trees, but if I climb on my roof, I can peek through the trees and see the ocean. So it's a little bit of both worlds. But if it's really about the neighbors and it's really about getting along, and I like Dave's suggestion about maybe limiting the kind of trees or at least keeping them trimmed to a certain height, because some of those pines, those go up forever. It's like a tall building out there.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lozey, this question, it says, where do you stand on mansionization? The deed restrictions for PVE limit the height to 30 feet and square footage of a residential structure to the lesser of 50% of lot size or 30% of lot size plus 1,750 square feet. At what point does a home that meets these constraints become a mansion and subject to additional limitations through the neighborhood compatibility ordinance?
Wow. So the, to me, mansionization, which is kind of a dopey word, I guess, but that, that to me is far and away, we talk a lot about the finances and all these things, but to me, that is the biggest issue that concerns our residents. Again, going back to that Davenport Institute a couple of years ago, when there was there were community forums and people wrote, what's your biggest concern? Far and away, there were four of those forums around the city. I went to all four. Number one, mansionization. My observation is that I think we've got a little tilted. I think we need more. The city council should give marching orders to the planning commission and then hold the planning commission accountable for results. I think this constant appealing has become a mess. But I think the biggest problem is people think of views and they say, oh, there's no view impact, therefore this house is okay. And to me, the biggest issue, and maybe the definition of mansionization, is massing and looming. So to me, that's the biggest problem.
I'm with you. Let me add two things. One, we don't consider the overall volume of the house. So we look at massing and we look at looming, and we're worried about view, and we're trying to comply with an NCO, but the overall volume of the home, I'm not sure that we're actually looking at those calcs. I think our process is broken. People go and they get their plans. They spend $30,000 with an architect. They've never met their neighbor before because they just bought the lot. They proceed along in the process, and all of a sudden the fight begins when the NCO meeting happens. I'd like to develop a standard process between the Homes Association, Planning Commission, that actually gets this under control, hands a nice, beautiful, slick, glossy document, no matter where someone goes inside the city, and says, this is how it's going to work. And this is how you get through the process. And I think that educational process would be extraordinarily helpful.
Okay. Ms. King?
The vast majority of our planning projects do go through on the first Planning Commission meeting. However, increasingly there have been some very large homes proposed in our city that have generated quite a bit of opposition because of the impacts they're having on their neighbors. And to me, mansionization is not necessarily, it's not just a big house, it's a big house in the wrong place. And we have had a couple of those projects. I believe that the parameters that were mentioned in the context of the question, maybe we do need to look at those again, because the people who are proposing these houses are building within what our code allows. And yet, increasingly, we are not permitting residents to build out to those codes. So maybe we just need to set expectations a little clearer for all parties. Certainly, there are other metrics that we need to look at, such as gross floor area. That's not included in the calculation that we measure now. It's a figure that we get, but it's something that can really make a house seem much more impactful to the neighbors. And so I think that's another thing that we need to consider, whether that should be some kind of requirement.
Mr. McGowan?
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind our neighborhood compatibility and look at the neighborhood in which we're talking about. There's not one shoe that fits all, in my opinion. We can go into the terrace area of Malaga Cove, and an oversized home there may not be viewed as oversized up on top of the hill. And I believe that we need to have a more streamlined process of how we set expectations between the Homes Association and the City Council. And I will just throw one additional comment in there that one of my colleagues up here recently did a mediation on a dispute with having to do with the size and views of a home. And I think this was a successful project, as I understand it, and I would encourage us to consider utilizing more of the arbitration process in the future.
Mr. McCarthy.
I agree with one of my colleagues. I like Jennifer's idea of looking at the business, the code again, and there's not one plan fits all, depending on where you live and the neighborhood compatibility. So, you know, I'm a big I like having the open space. I live on a street where there's a couple of double lots and there were single homes on them. People lived in them since the 50s, and contractors are buying them up and they're putting up two beach houses on them. So I would like to take a look at and kind of freezing some of those double lots. So if it has a single house on it, it can stay a single house. Now, I don't know if that's something we can do legally, but I think I enjoy the space that we have, and we already have enough traffic and enough people, and so I want to preserve the lots that we have.
Ms. Peterson.
I think mansionization has gotten a really bad rep. To me, mansionization really isn't about being the mansion. It's more about being just not keeping up with the neighborhood character. So the City Council and the Planning Commissions just had a joint meeting, and we talked about some of the ways to improve the process. And one of the things that was discussed was that if we're not approving up to 50%, why are we still having that as a threshold? Why can't we lower that down? Also, regarding data, before we were not using the gross volume, and sometimes, a lot of times, the architect know the loophole, and so they will put a storage underneath the staircase or a 5-car garage or something that adds to the volume of the property instead of just what the square footage actually says. So there's a lot of things that I think we can refine, and we're also working with the Homes Association to make this an easier process.
Okay, thank you. We begin with Mr. Kemps now. Some in PVE want to see the city-owned beach club expand memberships in order to reduce the wait list and/or reduce day use fees to increase access for non-members. Others report that the beach club is already at full capacity and that such changes would reduce the quality of the club experience for both current and future members and day users. Since the City Council has the authority to determine both the number of memberships available and the amount of the day use fees, what changes, if any, would you advocate for when it comes to the beach club?
I think we have to realize that in the early 90s, a bunch of people got together privately and actually really brought that place back together. I remember being in middle school in the late 80s, and that property was entirely shut down and ready to be condemned. So I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm not a member, but I'm absolutely respectful of what's there. I think the current council puts a lot of pressure on that beach club. I think they're holding back an agreement in order to try and press them and push them into having more membership. I think it needs to be controlled. I think there's a reasonable compromise to be found with a very small increase. I also understand that there are some ADU issues relative to compliance, and that the beach club is sensitive about having to invest in that because there is no 20-year agreement. So I think that all can be attacked and resolved, and I'd be in favor of a 20-year agreement with a reasonable increase in membership.
Ms. King?
The beach club contract came up for renewal, I think, in 2016, and at that point there were no renewals left on the contract. So we're in that last 10-year period, and I certainly understand why the beach club is interested in obtaining an extension to give its members and potential members some certainty. It's a tremendous city asset, and I do appreciate the fact that it was residents, really, who were able to build that asset and maintain it. However, there are a lot of times when it's really underutilized, and I know we can't make residents go there on sort of a dreary afternoon, but I would like to see us be maybe a little more creative with different types of membership tiers. There seemed to be a concern when we were talking about the agreement before that increased membership would crowd the gym. So perhaps we can have some type of membership that wouldn't have gym access, or we can have just weekday memberships or different tiers. And I recognize that's a little difficult for staff to monitor, but I think in this case, increasing access is really important, and being creative is equally important.
Mr. McGowan.
I think we just need to have some open dialogue with the Beach Club board and try to look at what are the options that are available that might be palatable to both sides. The city would like to see increased revenues, I'm sure. As far as the Beach Club is concerned, they're going to want to make sure that they maintain the quality of the club that they currently have. And I think, as been suggested already, maybe there's some alternative membership structures that can be filled in for a portion of it, such as different times of the day that you can access the facility. There may need to be a fee increase that the beach club owners might be willing to pay if it's a revenue consideration for the city. But it is a gem, and I think we have to keep in mind that the residents back in the 90s did invest a lot of time and effort and money to bring this to where it is today, and I want to make sure it's maintained into perpetuity in the same fashion.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy.
That's one of the things that people come to the Hill for, is for the beach club. They love that beach club. There's none unlike it or in the surrounding area. But I think we need to get all the facts. Okay, so full capacity, what does that mean? Who determined that? I think I'd like to get some information maybe from the fire department. What is their definition of full capacity? Maybe from some subject matter experts that put together gyms. They know when they build a gym or a facility that there's a formula that goes into it to determine how many people they can sign up. So I'd like to get a little more information before I make a determination.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Peterson.
As we all know, there are 4 concessions that we get revenue from, and beach club being as much of a gem as it is, it really hasn't hit its potential. I've been a liaison for the beach club for the last couple of years, and one of the things that we do talk about is increasing membership, because increasing membership means increasing dues, increasing initiation fees, and it adds to the total of what they can put in capital improvement and also to the concession fees that they pay to the city. So without having them locked down for 20 years, we want to make sure that they are adding certain numbers every year. And like Jennifer said, they can come up with some creativities on how and what kind of memberships they can add. Weekday memberships, senior membership, junior memberships, off-season membership. There's a lot of areas that I think that they could improve upon. And so that's what the encouragement that I've been giving them. Thank you.
So this is one that I've been trying to get my arms around, because I'm trying to figure out how many people are actually unhappy with kind of the current process. So I can't quite tell if it's not very many people who are just really loudly unhappy, or if it really is a lot of people. All of the, really what is capacity and how many members should there be? It just seems like from a safety perspective, that ought to be a number you can determine how many people you can have. I mean, I think you can use it with a day, a day use fee. So if you're not a member, you can still go. You can't use the gym or the gym. I think is kind of a loose term. I think it's like 5 treadmills. But that seems to be where there's just seems to me, it's a beautiful treadmill, of course, but if that's where you're going for your heavy lifting, I'm not sure that's the place. So I think all of the ideas on the table are good. Getting more creative with memberships, different types of memberships, and a study of really understanding, and then getting our arms around really how many people are unhappy here.
Okay, thank you. Our time is running short. I'm going to take one more question. Admittedly, there's a bunch that I have not been able to present, and I apologize for that. But this is the last question. Would you support the addition of a school resource officer to the high school in Palos Verdes Estates, which is apparently available and provided in Manhattan Beach and El Segundo? Okay, I believe we begin with Jennifer. I'm sorry, yes, correct.
Yes. Yes, I think a school resource officer is a tremendous idea, and could be also a great collaboration between the district and our city. Of course, it's all going to come back to resources. You know, who's going to pay for that officer? And then once an officer is at PV High, then would Penn High also want and deserve an officer? So again, what I've learned on the city council is that every decision has unintended consequences, and you want to try and anticipate those and address those as much as you can when you're making a decision. And so my preliminary answer is yes, that's a fabulous idea, but I would want to go through all the potential unintended consequences before I would, without qualification, support that. But yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Well, I concur with Jennifer that it's a great idea, but I also would want to step back a little bit and look at how we would provide that service and how it would be funded. And I don't have the information that I've been presented or have any knowledge on what that might entail. I think it's a great idea, but again, it's a competing resources, and do we do that versus something else?
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
I think we're all going to agree that's a great idea. The issue is funding, but I think we should look at maybe somebody part-time, maybe not a full-time officer, or somebody who's retired and looking to do something that can spend some time on the campus, maybe not 8 hours, but 4 or 5 hours a day. I think it's valuable for the children to see, the kids to see that there's a cop and they feel comfortable go up and talking to them. I think we get a lot of mileage out of that as a community.
Ms. Peterson?
Definitely would support something like this, although I think that we need to really define the scope of work of what this resource officer would do, and also if there's a way to incorporate that resource officer into our current staff, so maybe there's not a whole lot of additional costs involved.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey?
I would say yes, of course. On the surface, it sounds like, it's a great idea to be supported if we can. The thoughts that come to mind, we have a great volunteer police officer group, and I wonder if that's something that could be incorporated there. And then to me, it sounds like, the first note I made to myself is it sounds like it's something that perhaps should be a collaboration among all 4 cities on the Hill, and maybe find a way for everybody to kind of share the burden or the financial burden of that.
Thank you. Mr. Kemps?
Yeah, realistically, we have students at our high school that come from all over the Hill, not just our city. So I love the collaborative idea. I love utilizing our reserve officers. I'm very hesitant to use existing payroll considering our pension challenges, but there's nothing more important than our kids. So I'd absolutely be open to hearing more about it and would review it, sure.
Thank you. I think we're at the point where we're ready for our closing statements, and we're back to the beginning with Mr. McGowan. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the League and the Chamber for organizing this event tonight. But as you go out and look at your absentee ballot or your polls on March 5th, I hope you will consider my background, where I think I've got an extensive financial background, but it doesn't end with just financial. I want to take the type of analytical approach to all decisions before the City Council. In other words, we need to do an open book analysis, looking at the pros and cons of every decision, whether it be an additional officer at the school or whether it be how we deal with Butcher Hill. I want to have the complete homework done, and I want the residents to be able to understand why the council is making a choice between A versus B. I thank you and encourage you all to vote.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you all for coming and for staying, spending the evening with us. We appreciate it. I spent the last 39 years working with bad guys and cops, so I typically address everything head on. So what I'd like to do for the city is set expectations for everybody, hold people accountable, and test them, and performance or evaluations and candid conversations. I love this city. I want to make it a better place to live, and I'm going to be here for a while. Thank you.
Ms. Peterson?
Thanks to everyone for coming, and some of you have been here for both forums, so I appreciate that. Some of the candidates are calling that the city needs new leadership. So let me paint you a picture about what the new leadership would look like if some other candidates get elected. Measure D failed. Measure E would have failed. There are some recommendations that we're looking for from the Finance Advisory Committee that are very, I would say, a little bit more simple, like grant funding or additional revenue sources, or what do we do with pensions, or things like that. And so far, not because we've been obstructing them or not providing them information, is that some of these studies take a long time. So I'm not quite sure if you would get the new leadership you're looking for, if you're finding people that are indecisive or cannot come up with any recommendations. So I am urging you to vote and keep incumbents because we're voted #1 city to live in for a reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lozey.
Well, I'm going to finish where I began. I'm running for city council because I strongly believe we need new leadership. I think our leaders want our residents want leaders to preserve the character of our beautiful city, and I think they want us to address financial issues head on. Leaders want leaders who will put the needs of residents first, who will make decisions based on what residents want, not based on what city council individually thinks is best. I intend to bring a new dynamic and energy to the city council, to treat all of our residents and their views with respect, and to treat each other with respect. We need to deviate from the business as usual mentality. We need to dig in and improve our current operations and services and make a plan for the future. A vote for me is a vote for new leadership, a vote for financial responsibility, a vote for transparency and open communication, but most importantly, a vote for someone of high integrity who has the courage to tell residents the entire truth always. Thank you.
Mr. Kemps.
At the end of the day, we are all neighbors. We live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Today, we have an opportunity to make a significant change to the makeup of our city council. This will improve our trajectory, preserving our city's character and our financial future. I was a student in our school district. Now I'm a parent, a PEF donor. I am grateful for the opportunities that are afforded to me by this community. As an entrepreneur with a 30-year track record, I solve challenges every day, and I'm uniquely qualified to add a new dimension to this council. With leadership, honesty, and transparency, our council can reestablish trust. We can overcome these challenges, and we can prepare our beautiful city for the enjoyment not only of our children, but of our grandchildren. Please help protect Palos Verdes Estates by making me one of your 3 votes. Thank you.
Ms. Lozey. Ms.
King. Ms. King.
It's been a rough night on that.
Thank you so much to the League and the Chamber and for all of you for attending. I want to talk about experience. Experience matters. This is a difficult job. It takes time to understand all that it involves. For example, this evening you heard the City Council deals with budgeting, pension liabilities, Planning Commission appeals, trails, communication, etc. Each time I've had the opportunity to deal with these and other issues, I feel more capable and better prepared to deal with that type of issue the next time it arises. And it's helpful to have someone with experience deal with new issues, sharing what didn't work before so that new change can be productive. Experience is also important in building relationships with our neighboring cities, our county representatives, and our state legislators. During the past 4 years, I've built those relationships, and that will help our city address those issues that require regional and statewide approach. Every single member of our council is in his or her first term, and there will be 1 new member on the city council. I urge you to cast at least 1 of your votes for experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we could have squeezed in 1 more question, but we're not going to. So on behalf of the Chamber and the League of Women Voters, we would like to extend our gratitude. Thank you. To all the candidates for being present and to all of you for being present as well. And thank you so much. Look forward to your voting on the proper date. Thank you.
We did it.